Welcome back to Think Twice MTG Podcast. I'm your host, Drew.
And I'm Alan.
And today we are coming to you with an emergency broadcast because we had a banned and restricted announcement.
Emergency broadcast that we've all known about for 3 months.
It's correct. In that sense, it's an emergency
Yes.
because it occurred today, But I got to say, Alan, I'm a little disappointed in this banned and restricted announcement.
Oh, interesting, because I think this is exactly the result I wanted.
Interesting.
And I don't think I realized it until I read that it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can talk about it. It's percolated some thoughts.
That feels good.
But yeah.
It feels like we've had some unbannings to go along with our bannings recently. With these BNR announcements.
Sometimes.
And this was just a single card was banned and nothing was unbanned.
Yep.
For the modern format, and that is Underworld Breach is now no longer playable in modern.
Bum, 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 bum. Just like every other format.
Yeah.
Because it's banned in Legacy, banned in Pioneer. It'll never come back to Standard, so just another one bites the dust, as they say.
So I'm going to have a hot take. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
I don't know that this card needed to be banned, in all seriousness.
Okay, explain why.
So, personally, my threshold for determining whether or not a card needs to be banned is, there's several criteria, I suppose, but number one, is it oppressing the format?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I feel that this is oppressing the modern format currently. There's some finer points here that I think that you and I could discuss.
Yep.
And we will, obviously, but I don't know that this card was universally applicable, and I think it just found its way into a situation similar to Krark Clan Ironworks.
Yep.
Which is that a deck was created that included it. It's a major component of the deck. And the people who were good at piloting it were getting their winning percentages so high that I think that Wizards thought we have to do something not for an F&M level, but a competitive play level.
Yeah.
And I guess I take a little bit of umbrage with that because it always seems to me that regardless of what kind of major event, whether it's a pro tour or some other kind of showcase event is being put up, teams of people, groups of people always either meta game and bring similar decks, and then we always just have a 3 or 4 deck event where it ends up boiling down into which of those decks are the best in that particular event, and then in the top 8 we get a bunch of mirror matches anyways.
Yep.
So I don't know that this deck is so oppressive to the format as a whole that it warrants a banning. And I don't know. I think that their reasoning for the competitive play side is a little hollow because regardless of whatever deck is most popular for that particular tournament, we are going to get a bunch of crappy gameplay anyway.
So recently, in the past month to 5 weeks, I don't remember the exact dates, there were 2 American regional championships played in the modern format, oddly 3 weeks apart from each other. We had one in Portland, then 2 weeks later was one in Charlotte, and I'm like, why are there 2 regional championships in the exact same format so close together? Not that okay, they've got the whole season thing that I don't fully follow and how long each one lasts or whatever. And so I get that you want to keep it kind of, if you qualified playing modern, your RC should be in modern, and I get that. Just they were so close, it was weird. So both of these events were at least 1,200 players. So not a Pro Tour size small metagame that you can metagame for. This is an open metagame. both of those events, Breach was either tied for. I believe in Portland, it was tied for the most played deck. If I remember, the information was told to me correctly in a different podcast that I listened to. And in Charlotte, it was by far the most played deck. And when you looked at the data combined of those two together, it had 0 bad matchups. It was at least 50% in every single matchup. And I think that's the thing where that starts to suggest that even if it's only on the competitive side, our FNM, we haven't seen it. Doesn't mean other people, I'm sure there are people's FNMs that they've got a dozen of these decks running around and they hate it. That it might not be like making the format utterly terrible to play, but when you have a deck that it can be pushing 30% of the tournament and still not have a deck that can really beat it consistently, I think that is a sign that it needs to go, because if you don't take it out, it will just start to spread like the Borg, and everybody will be like, well, if I want to have a chance at winning anything, because as soon as we had a Breach player at our FNM 3 days ago, or whenever Friday was, I don't know. I'm on spring break, days don't matter anymore.
Right.
And so we had a Breach player show up for the first time, and I noticed he was sitting at table 1 the entire night. So that starts to become, once one person shows up with it and somebody's like, well, now I have to bring it in order to compete against that thing, because the only good matchup is the mirror, and then you just have to try to learn how to play it, and then it starts to just spread like a virus. And so that's what I think, why this one in particular is, meets that mark. But I think you're right, and you're hitting on something, that sometimes they ban cards for the competitive scene, and sometimes they ban cards for the more casual scene, and it's difficult to tell how to predict which one is going to be the one that causes the action this time. Because I think that the Grief and maybe also Fury bans were more for the FNM level of stuff.
Those cards had to go.
But those cards were on the competitive level, were never anywhere near the level of performance that this card was.
But they were super oppressive.
And that's what I'm saying, is by sheer ubiquity and lack of bad matchups, Underworld Breach is also oppressive. Because it's the only deck, if you want to be able to win a tournament where people are going to show up with their most serious game face on, you have to be able to beat it, which means in this case, since it has no bad matchups, you have to play it. And that makes it oppressive. It stomps out all other card choices. Where Grief and Fury never reached the win percentage of this deck. They didn't come close, but they stomped out people's willingness to play the game. And I think that's what you're hitting on, is that emotional level of Grief and Fury felt like, you're like, why am I even playing? Or maybe playing against a Breach deck, you don't get that same emotional feel, but on the numbers side, it's like a logic ban versus an emotional ban.
Well, I mean, with Fury, you couldn't play dorks.
Yep.
And then even 1/2s were not safe, and like you could see that with the inclusion of cards like Fury and Orcish Bowmasters, Wizards has changed their design philosophy on 1-mana creatures to go from, we're going to go from an 0/1 or a 1/1 to a 1/2.
Yes.
In order to make sure that you're able to get some kind of gameplay out of this creature for 1 mana, right? Yep. Like, still, it's very much still a bolt the bird type of mentality with modern players, but like Fury did such a good job of pushing those kinds of starts out of Modern at every level. And I don't see the same thing happening yet with Underworld Breach. But here's what I'll say to your point. I thought that this card was going to get banned. Everyone thought this card was going to get banned.
Like we've known for at least 3 weeks that this was at least one part of this announcement today.
Yeah, solid money was to go on Underworld.
Yes.
I threw it into Storm at our FNM cuz.
Yep.
And I don't know. I mean, so if this say Grinding Station or some other important card in the grinding station or breach decks.
Same deck.
Yeah. Was given the axe in place of Underworld Breach.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that like the breadth or like variety of decks this card could go into has truly been explored. Like I was thinking about, and I think probably one of the first decks that people put Underworld Breach in when it came out was, well, you can cast Lightning Bolt a lot of times out of your yard
Mm-hmm.
and just burn people out with this if you're able to get sufficient cards into your yard.
Yeah. I think what you're kind of hinting at is what I'm going to call the Titan effect. Primeval Titan could go in a lot of other shells in Modern, but it doesn't because the one it's in is far and above the best way to play the card. It's the only way to like truly play all of the parts of the card and like get the value. And I think that's the same thing. And we've seen this like people talk about whether it's you hear it on the internet or people talking about it, a card gets banned and they'll say, yeah, but I played it and I didn't play it in a broken way. So why did my card get banned? And it's like, well, it's kind of your fault that you didn't maximize a card. It's like, well, I play Lightning Bolt, but I never pointed at a creature, so it should be okay, right? It's like, no, that you're just not playing the card to the full extent that it can be played. So while, yes, it could fit in a lot of things, I've played it before in a Death Shadow deck where it was just play this, recast Bauble until your graveyard's gone and you're surveilling with DRC, so you get a ton of surveils and you just reload your whole hand and then go again. And is it broken and bannable in that playstyle? No, but the card can be used in this way. And so I think that means it needs to go because, like, my thing with Underworld Breach in specific, as opposed to getting rid of a different piece in the deck, is that Breach is only ever going to evolve to this kind of thing. It is never going to, like, if it's good enough to be in a deck, it's because it does something stupid like the way it does. It's like, oh, and I just played my whole deck for free. Yay! Look, I did Underworld Breach things, compared to so many other cards that it's like, even when you push it as far as it can, Lightning Bolt can only deal 3 damage for 1 mana. Like, you can't, without having other cards and other things in play, you can't make Lightning Bolt be more than that. And so I think that, like, in my opinion, this is the right choice to get rid of this card because it's only going to become a problem the next time. And it's weird because this card looks like an enabler, but it's actually a payoff. Because this card doesn't have any text that actually says you can win the game with it on it. But what it is it makes your entire graveyard usable cards, and so card advantage doesn't mean anything anymore because it's sitting in the trash bin, but that's exactly where it's best used in my deck. And all they have to do on this card to make it, like you're talking about, a fun way to like add some value to decks is make it so that when you escape the card, it gets exiled. Like, how hard is it? And, you know, people talk about the card Yawgmoth's Will, and like that's a card that you and I have never really like played with, but it's like one of those cards that you hear about people talk about. And that card is 2 and a black, one more mana than Breach, and it says until end of turn you may play cards from your graveyard. That's basically what Breach says. And this thing says if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. So you can't do the broken part of Breach, which is I reloop the same card. If it was that every time you wanted to make an extra mana by escaping a Mox out of your yard with Breach, you had to find a new Mox, it would be totally fine. But because all you need is the one and you can just keep on bringing it back out, that's the issue.
Okay, so can we now talk about Mox? Because why is Mox not banned? It feels exactly the same thing. Like you're going to take Mox Opal and you're going to put it into the thing that abuses Mox Opal the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent enabler, and there's almost no drawback to Mox Opal because of the way that you construct your deck. Tell me how that card is different than Underworld Breach.
I think this is reflecting a shift in the way they're trying to manage the ban list from the time period when Faithless Looting and Mox Opal got banned. And I think then they had banned a number of payoffs for a card, say Mox Opal, and they decided, okay, we just need to get rid of the enabler. And I think what we've seen is they're shifting to, we would rather continuously ban the once every other year payoff that we print that is too good than ban the enabler, because Mox Opal on its own, while extremely powerful, has no way to let you win the game. And so you have to put in the other thing, and it just, when we've printed a payoff that's too good with Mox Opal, we'll get rid of it. But Mox Opal can do more fair versions of Mox Opal things if they just keep the enablers in check. And so I think that's what they're trying to do, and that's why they decided, let's bring Mox Opal back, and Faithless Looting as well. Faithless Looting is a powerful enabler that they banned at one point because it was, oh, well, graveyard decks are just doing too well. So instead of getting rid of just the graveyard payoffs they thought were too good, and you can still do, I don't know, Mardu Pyromancer level things with Faithless Looting. Like, nobody said Mardu Pyromancer was a problem. But it was doing, Faithless Looting is doing the exact same thing in that deck as it did in the broken decks. I'm putting the thing it wants to be in the graveyard. They're just, I think what we're seeing is them say, okay, we've decided, at least for now, we would rather get rid of the payoffs when the payoffs are proven to be too good and leave the enablers to enable a whole spectrum of things, rather than get rid of the enabler and nothing on that spectrum can survive, is what I think.
I can't remember if it was Spike or Dingo, probably Spike, who said Modern is now foundationally Modern Horizon, all Modern Horizon cards. And then Wizards is systematically going through and testing for cards that have already been printed that are on the acceptable power level with Modern Horizons cards.
Mm-hmm.
So if that is true, which it certainly feels true based upon the number of unbans that we have seen in the last year or two compared to the last 8 years prior to it.
In the last 2 years, haven't we seen 5? Because we saw Preordain, the 3 from December, and I feel like there was one other card in there as well. Jace was before that, but like we could lump that into the same, because like we didn't see unbans for a long time, and then we hit Jace and Stoneforge along with Bloodbraid Elf.
Preordain.
So Preordain like came a couple years later, but that original run kind of like right around like 2020 or whenever it actually happened, 2021. Bloodbraid Elf, we had what's the fairy enchantment? Bitter Blossom.
Oh, Bitter Blossom.
Also came off. We had the Thopter Sword combo got unbanned. So they did that whole run, and it's really been like in the last 5 years that they've started bringing these things back in. And so like to keep on your point, I think you're right, and I believe it is Spike who said it, that like he likes what they're doing of trying to bring some of these old powerful like nostalgic cards back, so that it's not just Modern Horizons, it's Modern Horizons plus the stalwarts of the format, which is funny because at one point all of these cards that got banned were villain cards.
Sure.
And now they're heroes. Mm-hmm. It's the exact opposite of the Batman thing.
Because they're coming back to save us.
Right? Yeah. It's, in Nolan's Batman was you either die a hero, you live long and become a villain. All these cards are you died a villain and then you became resurrected as a hero. Yeah. So it's kind of funny because now all these cards that I'm sure there are some people that are like just like, oh my god, they gave me Faithless Looting back. That in 2021 when it got banned, we're like, fuck Faithless Looting, get this shit out of here, And so it's funny to see that it's like, well, perspective, and we look at things from a different direction. But your comment here actually it brought me onto a point that I thought about today while I was disc golfing in 35-degree weather, because I'm a crazy person. But I love
that's
it.
Right. You're on spring break.
Yes. So you mentioned the like Spike's idea of like this is Modern Horizons versus the old powerful nostalgia cards. And I think I've realized that I've switched to a different side of a take on something. So when we talk about the legacy format, cards that come to mind, Brainstorm, Force of Will, these like really powerful types of like, oh shoot, these are things that we've only kind of heard of and they're like legend almost to us, right? And they keep on banning other cards, and even if those cards are maybe only enabled because of things like Brainstorm or Force of Will or similar ilk. And I remember now with Pioneer, they've talked about when they were working through, and I think specifically it came up when they banned Expressive Iteration in Pioneer. And people are like, well, why don't you just ban Treasure Cruise? And they specifically came out and said, like, hey, we kind of want this format to be different. And this is the only format where you can play Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time. So we kind of want that to be part of the identity of this format. So right now we're banning Expressive Iteration, even though Treasure Cruise might technically be stronger, and we think both of them together is too good. So we're going to get rid of one because we want to have a format where you can play this thing. And at the time, I remember reading that, and I was just like, that's bullshit. Just get rid of the more powerful card. Like, this is stupid. Like, why would you make that decision? Like, just get rid of the more powerful thing and keep the one in. It's partially because at the time I was an Expressive Iteration fan. I still am. But I think also it made me a little worried that they were going to get rid of it in Modern because they got rid of it in Pioneer and Legacy. But Modern doesn't have a premier kind of centralized core to its identity card draw spell like Brainstorm in Legacy or Treasure Cruise in Pioneer. And what I think today made me realize is that actually I like that aspect of purposely curating a format to have certain things that these are just stalwarts. Like, these are pillars of the format, and even though they might be kind of always the top of the power level, it's fun to be able to have somewhere where you can play certain things. And so if part of the Modern identity is we're releasing these old, deemed too powerful for the format cards back into the wild, even if they might enable things that then cause other bannings to happen. Mox Opal maybe is the cause for the Underworld Breach ban. I think now I'm kind of in the camp where I'm okay with that, because let's allow us to play cool, powerful things that we like in an area. And if it's just, hey, this is the X, Y, and Z cards exist here format, and we're going to kind of keep them around, even if it means we have to ban things that come up that are too good with them, I think that's kind of cool. I think it's kind of cool that if you're a Treasure Cruise fan, you can go play that somewhere. That's not Commander. Sorry, Commander players, you're not real.
Don't apologize to them.
Yeah. Yes, but you see how I did it in kind of an insult? It's the backhanded compliment, okay? It's a skill.
Artificially keep our card prices too high.
Yeah, oh my god. Artificially, because, sorry, real quick side tangent, because Commander players are the dumbest smart people. Because they're smart because, like, I'm going to play a format where I only have to buy one of a card. That means it's cheaper. But you know what they all do? They all have 35 decks, and they're unwilling to share cards between them, so they don't actually need one Mox Opal. They need 12 because they have 12 decks that have a ton of artifacts, and it would make sense in. And for some reason, they have to have all 35 decks in a giant case that they bring everywhere with them. Because what if I need to play 35 decks?
I don't know why they need all the decks.
I don't know, but every Commander player is like, oh yeah, I saw this thing happen. Oh, our buddy who plays Mill.
God.
He liked a deck of mine on Moxfield, and so I followed him back. And I don't know when it's from, but he has a note on there that's like, oh, one of the things I'm like trying out is like competitive dual Commander or some nonsense. And he brought up this thing called like the 48 deck challenge that he saw on there, and it's a list of one deck for every single color combination. And it's you pick a commander and build a deck for that. And it's like, oh my god, this is what every Commander player is. They need to have a suitcase full of 48 decks for every single color combination. And not only that, they need to bring it with them whenever they play, just because what if 47 other people show up and they don't have a deck to play, but they want one? I am ready. Because that situation will happen. Rather than bringing like two, like most FNMs, I bring 2 Modern decks. Sometimes because I don't know what I want to play until right when we sit down. And sometimes because, hey, if somebody shows up, I can be like, hey, here's this deck. You can play it. You don't have to play nonsense, or you forgot some of your cards at home or whatever. Play a real deck and enjoy the experience. And then I don't have to play against, I don't know, a rubber banded stack of unsleeved cards. Anyway, sorry. lost myself there. Commander players are ridiculous, and they do drive work card prices because they should only need one copy, but they all need like 3 times as many as the rest of us do.
You're keeping demand too high, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, I lost track of where that started.
Don't worry. I'm gonna bring it back.
Okay, bring me back.
I'm gonna do something I don't normally do, and I'm gonna forego this opportunity to just continually trash on Commander players.
Okay.
And I'm gonna bring us back to a metagame discussion.
Yes.
Per MTG Goldfish. I don't know. Okay. Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
You want to do it right now?
I think we can finish, and it's just my idea that like I like having a format where there are certain cards that are kind of like, this is a thing. Treasure Cruise is my example in Pioneer. Force of Will, Brainstorm, and Legacy. Maybe we're starting to develop that identity with these cards being unbanned, and if Mox Opal is one of those, and they just basically keep it in check with all the payoffs that are a little too good, we'll axe those, but you can still play with Mox Opal friends. Here you go. I think I'm actually coming to the point where I'm okay with that, like the format having an identity that way, as well as just what cards are legal. Is like these are some of the things that are going to be in this format. So if you want to play that, here's a space for you.
Okay. Well, I'll move us to our my next point here.
Okay.
It's an interesting take, though, man. According to MTG Goldfish, I don't know how great a resource this is to track the metagame, but I use it to track the metagame.
I think it's like good enough to have a relatively accurate idea, but it does not have full data, and so like the percentages of how many of those decks are actually being played, and maybe does MTG Goldfish doesn't have anything like win rate data on it, does it?
Not that I've ever.
It's just this is how many of those are. It's ballpark, but not maybe isn't actually show how drastic one deck might be over another.
So if you decide that Temur Breach and Grinding Station are the same deck in essence,
the only difference, as far as I understand, is which win cons they choose to play. So there's 3, and it's Grape Shot, the 4-mana Jace that has the Lab Maniac ability on it, and Thassa's Oracle. And it's which 2 do you choose to play in your deck? For some reason, they've decided to split those.
Okay.
I don't know why.
So do we agree then that neither deck can live if it doesn't have Underworld Breach?
Correct.
Okay, so according to Goldfish, Grinding Station plus Temur Breach is 20% of the modern format. Okay.
So just as to add another data point, when they were talking about those RCs, I know that at I believe it was the Charlotte one, it was upwards of 26% of that metagame.
Okay. So I think that tracks with the logic that okay, this deck's 20% of the format. I would expect it to be higher at a condensed, format or an event where a lot of pro gamers are doing it.
Yeah.
Whew, got that out. Whew. So all of a sudden now we have a 20% vacuum in the format.
Mm-hmm.
What fills the format? Are we back to just Boros Energy taking the top spot?
No, I think Boros Energy is a dog to Orzhov.
Okay, so Orzhov, mid-range, is currently strumming along at, according to Goldfish, at 5.6% of the format. Mm-hmm. If that has a good matchup against Boros Energy, do you think, obviously I think Orzhov will probably move into the top 3 in the format, and if it has a good matchup against Boros, you could see it maybe starting to push Boros back down the ladder. You
willing to do a quick little experiment for me?
Oh, love experiments.
So at the top of your Goldfish page, there should be a drop-down menu where you can select the time frame that it's showing you.
I will try.
And I
show decks from the last 30 days.
Yeah, make it a smaller map. Make it like, I don't know what their increments are, but
there's 7, 14,
just try 14 and see if the numbers shift in any amount.
So the 14 if I go down to 14, so 2 weeks as opposed to a month, the modern metagame looks like Boros Energy at 14, almost 15%, Dimir Murktide, Ruby Storm, Temur Breach, and then Titan.
Interesting.
Grinding Station is 10th.
Yeah, so just add that to the breach percentage.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, so then it's like 10% total.
okay.
So it's halved. And if I go 7, it's just the same
Yeah, so
numbers.
I think that's probably an effect of once people kind of know the deck's going to be banned and there's no longer like a big tournament being played, I think most people have stopped playing this deck on in MTGO leagues because like you're not really gaining anything and you might as well be doing something else. But anyway, so you want to talk about what do we think is going to fill the space.
Yes.
So I
You think it's
know
Orzhov.
well, I don't know if I think that deck is going to jump to the top, and I don't think it'll be Boros either. I know Boros has been performing steadily worse at every major tournament that's been happening over Breach's lifetime. Part of that might be it has a bad Breach matchup.
Because it can't beat them quickly.
Yeah, it can't present a quick enough clock and can't disrupt them while keeping the clock up. But so I think Orzhov and Boros are going to be the kind of like heavyweight prize fighters that just slug on each other over and over again. But I think right now you've mentioned multiple times that we've seen like it seems like there's a lot of combo or combo potential in the format, and I don't think either of those decks, if people like ours all of a sudden, especially if like instead of one deck taking the 20% of breach, it's like what if three different combo decks rise to 7% each? And I don't think Orzhov and Boros can bring enough different tools to bear while maintaining their ability to have their cohesive strategy to fight multiple different combo decks effectively. So it'd be like, well, I need to make sure I can beat Titan this week, but I can't beat Titan and Yawgmoth and Storm if they're all equally represented as a decent size of the metagame.
So if you go down to 14 days, what's being played online is the top 5. Storm is 3rd, Titan is 5th.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those, I think that we've talked enough about those to classify them as dedicated combo decks.
Yeah, 100%.
So, the only other ones I really see, the only other combo deck I really see on the list is this blue white Belcher deck.
Yeah. So I think this is the hard part about doing these predictions, especially for people who aren't like as plugged in as some, say Spike or other people, is everybody always looks whether it's when a ban happens and we're looking at okay what's going to rise to the top, or when we're looking at spoilers. This is what Magic players do, is we only look at existing decks, but how many times does a new card get printed and an entirely new archetype spawn out of it? And I think, to the thing that I know you like in a format, I think this ban and no new unbans are still going to incentivize and be an opportunity for players to either bring back something that has fallen completely off a cliff, or there's now space in a metagame where we don't have an oppressive top deck or a very heavily played top deck that is dominating the competitive scene like Breach, but we still have Green Sun, Zenith, Mox, Opal, and Faithless looting that we've only had for 3 months. And like because Breach kind of rose fairly quickly within 2 weeks of those unbans, Breach kind of started being like, oh hey, Breach is putting up results, and kind of just expanded from there. We haven't really had time to explore what Modern looks like with these 3 unbans. Sorry, Splinter Twin, you're bad. So with those 3 unbans, they have not been fully explored yet in Modern, which is why I think they didn't unban anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's those 3 powerful unbans they made still need time to be explored, because Breach rose so quickly as a shell that already existed, and then when you added Mox Opal into it, people are like, oh, we're back, like hyperspeed, let's go. And so I think that's what's going to happen now, is we're going to have an exploration period of what's out there that isn't currently in existence. Orzhov was a new deck that came up because Ketramos is so obviously such a powerful engine that people are like, this is worth taking some time to build around. And I think just kind of out of sheer dumb luck, right before Ketramos came out is when that Orzhov deck started to see play. And then there are people like, oh, we have this kind of cool shell, but like maybe 20% of the deck is a little bit iffy. And then Wizards was like, hey, here's Aetherdrift spoilers. Here's a really powerful Orzhov card. Just put it in there. There you go. Yay, you did it, Orzhov players.
It did kind of slow it right in.
Yeah, like it was funny because it was like 2 weeks before the card got spoiled, the Orzhov deck started showing up, and then they're like, oh, this card's perfect. This is exactly what we needed. Oh, that's really well timed. It's like almost to the point where if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would be like, this is a little bit too nice. Like they spent some time building the shell and then they got the piece they needed with them. But so I think we're going to enter into a period where we're going to see new decks come up or old archetypes get revived. And so I think it's going to be hard to predict, but I would imagine that we're going to see some percentage of the player base that was playing Breach, and especially the people that picked it up at first, are just the people that are always going to play combo. And I think now you're going to be able to have them not all land on the same combo. And so you're going to see a propagation of combo archetypes. And I think that those kind of classic mid-rangey archetypes struggle against those. And then the hope is that now we just get a, like 5-way rock, paper, scissors game going that breeds a healthier metagame without one thing becoming, hey, I'm better than all of you. Where it might be, okay, Boros is good against this and that, and this thing's good against this and that, and this thing's good against this and that. And so now it's, well, if I get good matchups and I run hot, that's when I do well in a tournament, rather than I'm just better than everything else once everybody figures out the ideal list.
I think that's probably, I do have one more topic I'd kind of like to chat about, which is the speculation was if we were going to get an unbanning, we would get Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, Deathrite Shaman. I thought there was one other one that I remember hearing a bunch of people talk about, and for some reason I'm blanking on it right now. Oh, Ponder.
Yeah, oh God. We didn't get it.
Nope.
I'm curious why.
I think it's, in my opinion, what I would give as my best guess, because they don't tell us, is exactly what I just mentioned, is they want more time for the cards they already unbanned to be explored, to make sure, like, if now we enter another 3-month period where in 3 weeks we have a Mox Opal deck that is just like, yep, this is the next best thing, and it is that same level of nothing else can really compete on this level, and it's not so utterly terrible as some other terrible decks we've had in the past, that people are fine playing the format with that as a thing. You're like, I just hope I don't run into it, and as long as I'm not playing in really highly competitive events and I'm just playing like MTGO leagues and playing FNM, I won't really see it that much. It's fine, but it's sitting there as like, oh, the next Mox Opal deck is the thing. Then they might be like, well, we've decided that Mox Opal isn't actually okay, and it is only ever going to push something too far.
Let me look into my crystal ball here right now and answer that exact question for you. It is.
Yeah. But
it is too good.
Yeah, but like I think they want time to test these 3, and rather than let's put 2 more into the equation, and then like you get to a point where there's too much to try to parse through, and we won't get effective, data or testing of any of these things. If you put out too much at once. Now, some other idea that this spawned for me is I think, in my opinion, that if they have a list of, I don't know how many cards are on the ban list and how many are actually reasonably unbannable, but let's say there's a dozen cards left on the ban list that they think like, yeah, we could probably unban these.
Okay.
I would rather they say, okay, Magic players, here's the plan. In summer of 2025, we are going to unban all of the cards we feel are unbannable in Modern. Prepare. And what's going to happen is basically we're just going to start, like, the format is basically starting over because you're going to release so many cards that is just a expansive playground to go play whatever you want. And it might be years before we've actually explored all of the options with all the new cards. I think I would rather have them do that than every 6 months release one or two.
That's fine.
Like, just send them all out and say, here you go. You could even make money off of it by saying we're also doing a special release, whether you want to call it a secret layer or some other special release thing, that it's just a bunch of unbanned cards from Modern's history, and you can just buy it as this box product. And, it contains however many cards or whatever, or, put them into different selections and like, oh, here's the this, that, and the other thing one, and it contains these 2 copies of the unbanned cards plus some other fun things, and you can shuffle them together and do a limited thing with it, or whatever. Like, you could come up with ways to market it, make money off of it. But like, I'd rather, if they have a list of unbanned cards, just pick a day and say, here they all are, go. Understand that if something just utterly breaks, they might go back inside the box, but here you go have fun. Rather than basically, one of the things that people have brought up is their complaints about Modern Horizons, and has kind of been the perpetuating complaint about, like, oh, it's just a Modern Horizons format, is this talk around revolving that it's like, well, every time Modern Horizons come out, it's like Modern rotates. But to me, if you're every 6 months releasing 2 really powerful cards back into the ecosystem, it's like you're rotating the format. And I noticed over the past few days that, like, I haven't done anything Magic related. And normally, like, I even just, like, sit and watch TV, and I'll be sitting there goldfishing through Yawgmoth, or, sitting and looking at tweaks on lists or things like that. And I've had that urge, like, ooh, I want to do something with Magic. And this whole weekend I've been like, but what's the point? Because if they unban Ponder and Deathrite Shaman, I have to reassess every single list that I have. And so if it's every 6 months they're going to unban 2 or 3 cards for the next 2 years, you're just creating that rotation that people have been complaining about. Where instead, if you just say, here they all are in the wild, we now kind of have an established set of what the card pool is, and then you sprinkle in the new standard releases into it. But that's not going to drastically change the core of the format. And while it was really fun when the 4 cards got unbanned in December, it also was like, oh my gosh, like, I literally went into my Mox field and I deleted all of my lists. Because it's like, well, I have to rethink all of them now. Like, you can't just tweak them now. I have to start over from the beginning. And one of the reasons so many people liked a format like Modern, and I remember this being the thing that was told to us when we were still standard gamers, was like, man, you can buy a deck in Modern and just continue to play it and just make minor adjustments for years. And that was maybe true, and maybe it's actually always been a myth, and I think I'm actually closer to the it's always been a myth thing. But that was the idea. That's the reason people have told themselves they like the format. So don't perpetuate the problem that people had with this one product you released, like, yeah, it's rotating our format every other year or whatever, and now do a forced rotation by changing the core of what the format can be every few months, and just release it all at once and say, okay, go figure out what the format is now, and then we can all kind of reestablish and rebuild cores from there.
Probably. Yeah.
It made me think. This whole thing made me think. And that's like why I hinted at the beginning. I didn't really realize it, but I had kind of this like dread kind of held up. And when you posted it on our Discord, like, oh, it's just Breach's banned, that's it. I had like just this wave of relief. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to rethink everything I've been trying to build over the past few months with cards and decks and ideas, because it's not like, well, not only do I have to really think of building them, now I've got to acquire Deathrite Shamans, which spiked 200%, if not more, in the past 2 weeks. Like, literally 2 weeks ago, I looked at the price of them on Card Kingdom, and they were like $3.99 a copy, and they had copies in almost every single variety of printing you could want. And now I know Card Kingdom is sold out of everything. And if you try to go get them on TCG Player, they're all like 20 plus bucks. Maybe not now, because after the announcement, they probably all dropped again. But like as of just 2 days ago or Friday at FNM, it was like, yeah, they're like $20 plus. I'm like, and I don't want to go drop $100 on Deathrite Shamans right now. Like, but like, so like I had this like double sense of dread, is like, I don't want to have to like rethink the build of everything. And I know I suffer from a thing of when like, yeah, you can just play a worse off version of a deck. You know, like, okay, I've got Yawgmoth, and if they unban Deathrite Shaman, I'd put Deathrite Shaman in Yawgmoth. It seems like right up the deck's alley.
It does.
And so, sure, if they unban Deathrite Shaman today, I could still play Yawgmoth without Deathrite Shaman, but I hate the feeling of it, because it's like, how am I really, like, testing how good I am if I just am purposely playing with a worse version of the thing I'm trying to play? And just beyond that, like, I just don't like the feeling of as much. Like, this isn't what I want to play, because I want to play, like, the version of it that I want, that I picture in my head. But now I've got to work on getting Deathrite Shamans, and okay, now we've got to see his Ponder better, and if they unban Ponder, is Preordain just now never playable again? And like, it's been kind of cool to have Preordain. Now I'd be fine with having Ponder, but
Sure,
you know, yeah, and that sort of thing. And so I just realized that, like, man, I want time to be able to let the metagame kind of percolate and figure out. And then I know as a player, I want time to analyze it and figure out how to attack it. How do I understand it, so I can feel like I am operating on information rather than just going in blind. So.
Yeah, I don't feel the same way. I guess that it doesn't bother me, like, having to reassess. Like, that's part of the fun.
I just don't want to have to reassess over and over and over again in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I guess that's where we're different. Like, it's like, I enjoy that. So when we had Green Sun and Faithless Looting get unbanned, I'm of all those cards, I was like, ooh, Faithless Looting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like, number one, it was the cheapest one, and number two, you know, it's like, it plays into the things that I like to do.
Yeah.
So I was happy when it came out, but like, I don't know how much longer we want to go on with this conversation, but like, the thing here, I guess here's the thing that gives me the kind of like icky feeling that you were having, that you realized you were, when we didn't get an unbanning, it was like, oh, what a relief.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that gives me that icky feeling right now is that if I want to play a new deck, I have to go out and get 3 cards that all cost $30 individually.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter which one it is. Like Ketramos, Force of Negation, Green Sun Zenith, Amulet of Vigor, any land that you could possibly think of. Like,
the modern card prices are either it's super cheap or it's $30 plus.
Yeah.
There's very little in that middle.
You know, I'm making a list of those cards and just pricing them out to see, like, okay, I have 1 Force of Negation in my collection. Can I snag 2 more? And what does that allow me to play? Or do I need to save up for another month in order to get a playset of Ketramos so that I can have a whole new array of decks, right? And I will continue to hold out that, like, I don't know that I would say something like you can't play Underworld Breach with Grinding Station as like a pairing that's illegal to make for deck building purposes.
Okay.
I know we don't do that.
Yeah.
But if Wizards were like, these 2 cards cannot exist in the same deck, as opposed to banning either one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would like that, but like, I would like the room to explore putting Underworld Breach into decks that, quote unquote, are not so far on one side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
That it's like, this is the only way that you can play this card because this is the best thing that you can do with the card. I don't know. Like, if if you're talking, I mean, like, if you pay one in a red and it gets involved in a combination that wins you the game, what does it matter what that combination is?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, like I said, I threw it into Storm as a 3 of, just because I trimmed some fat on my list.
Yeah.
And I got into a scenario where I was like, I've played this. I had cast Past in Flames.
Yep.
And then I had cast Underworld Breach just because of the way that the turn was evolving.
Yeah.
And I was like, I found a path forward where I was like, oh, I can breach this to get me more mana.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm able to cast Past in Flames with 1 mana still remaining.
Okay.
So that
yeah.
I can go off, And I'm sure it was like a 2%. This happens 2% of the time.
Sure.
But I thought that was a lot of fun. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I found the path, And I mean, I guess the thing that I'm realizing as we're talking is, now that Breach is gone, are the decks that are going to take over Modern, are they fair decks?
I think the hope is that like Breach was a combo deck, an unfair deck that was deemed to be too high of a power level. We had to truncate it. In this case, we're just getting rid of the archetype in whole. And I think for a healthy metagame, you can't only have fair decks, because then it's just like it becomes what standard always
Modern
was.
looked like 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, and it's just like, well, okay, it's just who can grind the best and
Jund.
Yeah. But like, I think maybe part of the issue comes from everybody's always trying to find something that is good against everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, in Modern especially, like, we all have to be willing to accept, and it's a hard thing to accept as people playing a zero-sum game, and where like we all feel like we're good enough to be better than the people we're sitting across from. And it's like, I should be able to win this game. I find myself having this problem a lot when I play chess, is like I make a mistake and it's like, I know I'm good enough to have seen that, so why didn't I?
Right.
And then you get frustrated. And I think the same thing happens with Magic. It's like, I know I can win this matchup, so why didn't I? Well, it's just because you can't do it every single time. Right. But like, as Magic players collectively, and especially Modern players, we need to be more okay with losing or not being able to beat certain things with a certain deck. And so like, as somebody who's played Jund a bunch, if you sat down and they played a Tron land on turn 1, you're like, crap, I'm like 12% to win this match.
Yeah.
And it sucked, right? And so you started putting more and more into your sideboard to fight it. And did you ever get that matchup to winnable, or at least like consistently winnable? No. So like, at that point, it'd be like, you're like, okay, well, I'm playing Jund, and I just have to accept that if I face big mana, I just lose unless I get really lucky, and then not even worry about sideboard cards for it. Mm-hmm. But I think naturally, as like the people who gravitate toward this kind of game, we feel like we should be able to win every single matchup. Mm-hmm. And so we fight that, like, that logic coming in and saying like, you just have to be okay with losing sometimes. We're like, no, I'm not. I will find a way. But an actual good metagame is one where no matter what you're playing, there's stuff that's good against you out there. And like, you do have predators, and you have to hope that when you do run into them, things kind of fall your way. And then otherwise you just kind of hope to dodge them.
I was one of the guys that subscribes to our podcast. I was talking to him at an FNM the other day, and he has been on Titan for a long time. And to be honest, I don't know that I've ever witnessed a deck that has impressed me as much as Amulet Titan in its various iterations.
Yeah.
It's just gorgeous. And he switched up recently. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him about when he was playing Titan, and I said, like, what are your, I mean, I had him. There was a number of times I just was like, I've got him. Like, and then chokehold applied, and the bitch like gets out of it, yep. And then all of a sudden I'm staring down 3 Titans, and like 18 additional lands that he had on the board for like, he played 1 land and got all that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what's bad for you? in this deck, and he was like, I can't beat Blood Moon. So like, I thought to myself when he said that, I thought he knows,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we have another friend that we play Magic with, who I think is becoming an excellent Magic player, and he has recently gone away from a deck that I loved for him, green white, what I call land destruction, which is basically just guide pride with suit to taste. But like, and he's now on the Orzhov deck,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I thought to myself, like, what precipitates him wanting to make that change with how well I saw his deck function for him the last couple of times that he's played it,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I haven't gotten an answer for him yet, but I'm betting it's something around the effect of like, well, I've been having trouble with this, right? And so
Yeah.
like I made this change. And so I've never really done that. I've always said something like, well, I haven't had a really good time with my aggro deck. I'll switch to my combo deck.
Yeah.
You know, and then like I'll live off the fact that people don't know how to match up against me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And then when they find a piece of sideboard hate or know how to do it anyways, like on top of it, it's a real problem.
Yeah. And
So,
like
but
I
like it's just the evolution of like becoming a better Magic player is to understand, yeah, you're not going to win all these things.
yeah. And like you've got to be okay with it. Like I had I played that Merfolk Wizards mashup at FNM this past week, and like I don't
Mm-hmm.
think the deck was poorly built or anything, but like with the matchups that I faced, I think 3 of them were just not like what that deck is suited to beat, and it was just like okay, just it wasn't the time and place, and maybe that just means it's a bad deck in our local metagame because the matchups I played against are probably a lot of the more common style of matchups. And it was like I had to take a moment to consciously tell myself that so I didn't feel like down or like dejected or defeated that like, oh man, like, oh, this just sucks. Maybe I'm terrible at, having ideas or building the deck or whatever. It's like just no, like dude, you maybe I didn't. I guarantee you I didn't play perfectly, and there are spots I could have made better decisions, but like I walked into if I had known those matchups beforehand, I would have told you I was walking into a very steep uphill climb, and it's
Did
just
you
like, hey,
build did
sorry.
you build that list with the decks that you were going to play in mind, or did you build it with like a national meta?
I mean, not really. It wasn't really like a metagaming list. It was more testing like I think these cards out of this deck that I play are good, and then they naturally, when you stare at them, pair well with this. And so I kind of just want to see, does it work?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it, if you draw one half of the deck, it's good, but if you draw the other half, like do they mesh well, or is it two different decks that you have half of just stapled together? And if you draw all of side A, it's good, or you draw all of side B, it's good. But if you draw half of A and half of B, does it actually mix? It was really more of like my thought process there. And so, but like I took a conscious moment after match 3 last week just to be like, hey, like you can't take it personally and you can't be down because like sometimes you're just gonna lose. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'd remember in 2024 when I had a 6 month stretch where I didn't lose a match at FNM.
Yeah.
It's like okay, maybe I'm just regressing to the mean a little bit because I literally didn't lose for 6 months. So like okay, remember the high, Alan, and acknowledge that 6 month stretch was not the baseline. That is not the way it's supposed to always be. And so you're going to have some weeks that you go 1-3, and that's okay.
Well, hang on. Let's
Yeah.
talk. I mean, like, we're going to end this here in a minute, but
Yeah.
like, you have gone from playing decks that are like, you are one of the better players at our FNM, playing one of the better decks at our FNM,
Mm-hmm.
to basically being like, I like to play like this,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And like, I think that there would be the face of table one would look a lot different if you went to a deck that you're like, well, this power level, this thing's fucking sick, you know, and I'm really good at it, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna stay on it because I like it and it's good. But you're doing your thing where you're like, hey, I'm gonna see if like we can play Merfolk with no lords or one lord or whatever we're gonna do right now.
Yeah, because the lords are
You
bad.
know, and you're just testing. Yeah, you're kind of just testing ideas out, and you can win like that, but like I think you're not optimizing your chances.
Yeah, but to be fair, in 2024, when I didn't lose for 6 months, I was playing the exact same way I am now. So,
well,
it's like just to devil's advocate your point there. It wasn't like that was all on one deck and it was the top deck of the metagame. I was switching between all kinds of stuff there. One of them was Merfolk with Flame of Anor in it.
That's true.
So, anyway, yeah, it's just like my overall point is like to recognize a healthy metagame is whereas players, we're going to go through some of those frustrations of like, I can't beat this thing. But if you have things that you're really good against, things you have an even chance against, and things that you really struggle against, that's a sign of a good metagame if everybody's having that experience. And it's then we start to shift. Okay, well, now in order to beat this thing or that thing, I make this little change, but then that changes my matchup here a little bit, but I'm willing to cut 5% off my really great matchup to add 10% to my bad matchup, and I stay pretty even in the middle, or now I'm just trying to gain an edge in the middle ones and I've just ignored the bad one, and that's metagaming. Like, we should never be in a point where things are stagnant and just these lists don't change. Here's the 75 for each of the top 10 decks, and just mash them together and see what happens, and just like butt heads against each other. Everything's always shifting and evolving. And so if we can get to that point where everybody sits down and it's like, man, if I run into this, it's great. If I run into this, it's fine. If I run into this, it's bad. If we all have that spread, we've actually achieved success, even though it probably doesn't feel like it because we all have those moments or those matchups that are extremely frustrating. But so like that's hard for us as people who play games, and I don't mean just you and me, just like the collective of all of gamers in general, to accept that that is a winning state is where you have frustration because some fights are uphill. But that's, I think, one of the signs of the metagame is good.
I like our metagame currently, both nationally and locally.
Yeah, I think, like, on one last note on Breach, and I think Spike has said this too, is that Breach was actually, like, a fine deck to have as the top deck because, like, it wasn't just, like, crushing everything else down. It was just like, I'm just going to beat you through your hate and you're just going to accept that, but then all of your other matchups are fine because all of the other matchups can still metagame around each other, where we've had other decks like Nadu, for instance, is like, what is even going on here? And like everything was so warped to try to beat it that all of the other matchups were also miserable. But like, oh, hey, I've got my Graveyard Hate for Breach, and it also works against the Graveyard deck. Cool. I just have half of my sideboard is dedicated to one single deck, and even having half of my sideboard dedicated to it wasn't enough. But it's like, it didn't shift the whole metagame so far in one weird direction that it sacrificed all of the other gameplay as well. And so, like, if it was the thing that was going to stay around and they decided to take out Grinding Station and then those players just played DRC plus Tome Scour and they still win the exact same way, fine. Like, I would have been fine with it, but I think it's an overall positive to get that card specifically out because it's always just going to be sitting there waiting to come back and do this exact same thing. And I think it's one of those cards that is either like, we don't see it, or it's the best thing by far. And it's kind of like, and that's it. Because like, before Mox Opal got banned, when was the last time you saw an Underworld Breach?
Sure.
But then as soon as like one thing pushes it to good enough, it's crazy good enough.
Yeah, it's peanut butter and chocolate.
Yeah, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the thing it needed. But as soon as it gets the thing it needed, it's not just like, yeah, I'm hitting the speed limit now. I'm going the same speed as everybody else. It's like either I'm not on the road, or everybody get out of my way.
Well, the good news, Alan, is that we won't be seeing it. because you're not allowed to play it in Modern anymore.
Bingo. Call out cheaters when you see them.
That's right. So I think that's a good spot.
Yeah.
We got our thoughts out. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, guy.
So that's our show.
We did it.
So once again, I'm Drew.
I'm this guy.
We'll talk to you later.